On the 7th, smart population policy, migration, and conscious citizenship. Population policy is a dirty word in this part of the world. People see it as a code name for population control. By personal example, KB left a subtle but powerful example and message. Madam, I think that message is, quote, bring forth the number of children that you can train, end of quote. I'm not sure, Mama, that was that's the message that you've sent out to the rest of us. Even as the state has a public policy not to leave anyone behind in education and health, it should be no license to breed children without limit. Finding the right balance is important, however. On the one hand, Ghana might want to maximize its contribution to global labor supply, thereby maximizing returns from the diaspora. As stated earlier, labor could become Africa's largest export in decades to come. However, whether or not the diaspora and homeland can weave a dynamic synergy to sustainably propel the homeland as a prosperity haven depends on the consciousness of the citizenry. The waves of transformations of China, India, Israel, Japan, Vietnam, etc. benefited significantly from swaths of skills and capital from their global tribes, the diaspora populations. Africa has a growing diaspora population, but risks being the only region that might not reap the dynamic benefits of generations of migrants, ostensibly because of what I call the Bleaching Syndrome, which some deploy as a survival or coping mechanism. In simple terms, this is the deliberate but systematic loss of identity by the diaspora population. First, they lose their indigenous names, they lose their language, they lose their culture, and they're totally different people altogether. And hence, the inadvertent disconnect from the mainland. These constitute the floating cultures or global citizens without roots. And I will say this, what I call bleaching syndrome. And I want to just make 1-2 sentences about this. This is serious. Africa has millions in diaspora. I don't know about Ghanaians. I admire Ghanaians when I see them, in fact, from the name alone, Kwesi, and all this, and you know, you're from Ghana, that's it. And let me use my place. And like somebody says, Igbo, he spoke Igbo to me. Maybe my people are the greatest casualties of this. When slavery happened, the way the white man did it, first of all, you change the name. You are no longer Kwesi or Aqua. You are now Mr. Stone. Your language, whatever thing, forget it. You speak English. Your own children get up and start asking smart Stone. Their own grandchildren answering something smart. After a few generations, they've forgotten their roots. They have no clue. So, you find the Americans, the black Americans, they simply say, we are African Americans. They can't say, you can't trace the back again where they come from, whether they come from, you know, the current Ghana or Nigeria or Ethiopia, wherever. They have no clue. They're just African Americans. But that dislocation means that their connection to the mainland is broken. The umbilical cord is broken. If you find Chinese, Indians, Jews, and whatever, other globalizing tribes, wherever they are, their language, their names. In America, when they call somebody, they say it's of Greek immigrant, even after 10 generations. They call the name of another, say it's of Irish descent. They call the other one, they say is of German descent. From their names, they are able to say so. In the case of Africa, a new wave is going. When the guy gets in there, his first name is Chukwuma. I have been struggling to throw away Charles all my life and answer my Igbo name, which is Chukwuma. I have been struggling with that, but everybody else keeps bringing that Charles back. And so I guess I'm too late in the day. But none of my children answers an English name. But what you find is, you will now go, even those who are given this, Chukwuma will now change his own to chalk. Okay? Will now change it to, Chuks is even, we can relate to a chalk. And you are wondering, what is this one? Now, the other ones, they get the African names, they cut off the beginning, they cut off the end, and they leave something at the middle. You have no idea. Now, you have Samuel Peters, and you are wondering, where are you? So the other children have no such link. You find an Indian or whatever, even after fifth generation migrant, they have accents. Why? The first language they are taught at home is Hindi. That's the language they speak at home. Then they go out and speak English subsequently. What that means is that those kids, even the 10th generation, any day they get down to India, or they get down to Israel, or they get down to China, they immediately feel at home. They can speak the language, they have the names, they have the days, and they are global. Yes, there are Chinese migrants there, but they remain Chinese. These people constituted the major force for the transformation of these economies. The message I'm leaving is that Africa is losing that potential huge resource because of this disconnection. I've met many Nigerians out there in the US, and you ask the kids, somebody said, Kedu, Kedu is looking at you. Then the dad will say, don't you remember? Kedu, it means, you just say Odema. Oh yeah, Odema. He said it. And then, somebody said, Uncle, yes, my dad took me to Africa. Yeah, he's going to, because the dad took him sometime to Nigeria. He has no memory that it's even Nigeria. It's to Africa. So he's born to Africa. This dislocation, I'm trying to say, is cutting off the symbiotic dynamic relationship that had to make this huge resource, millions of our people in diaspora, or the generations after the first generation migrants, to become a potential source of growth for ourselves. And so I ask this question, ladies and gentlemen: how do we get the thousands or millions of Ghanaians in diaspora and their future generations to stay connected to the mainland? For starters, this will require deliberate measures to create a sense of national identity and consciousness in every Ghanaian, to make him or her such a proud and patriotic citizen that the bleaching syndrome won't be an option. I call it bleaching syndrome when people deny who they are. They are not proud of who they are. You got to bleach to be closer to the white man, to feel accepted and to feel adequate. That's why you need to drop your name. You can answer your local name. You have to answer Charles Samuel to feel, you are part of it, to feel accepted. I call it a bleaching syndrome. You deny your language, you deny your culture, and so on. Nobody else does. And I want to say that we in this bit need to begin to have deliberate programs to reverse this. Policy, research, and action will be needed to reverse this trend and to reconnect the broken pipes. The eighth, and these two are short ones. Activist Developmental Monetary Authority. Dr. Akwa, and I can see a lot of central bankers here. If KB were to come back to the Bank of Ghana, what would he do or see differently? Traditionally, central banks are the most conservative macro policy institutions with precisely defined mandate and narrow instruments. The political pressure to, quote, do more can be overwhelming, but thank God the independence of central banks in terms of instrument authority can sometimes provide safeguards. Politicians will continue to ask you, must be restrained not to use central banks to circumvent fiscal ceilings. I am sure KB could possibly say a lot. Surely, he would encourage the continuation of active coordination between monetary, fiscal, and structural policies of government. I always reminded fellow policymakers that it is one government, one economy. I don't know much about the activities of the Bank of Ghana, and I have no intention of commenting on its policies, even if I know. However, let me drop 2 footnotes from my experience. First, given the structure of some African economies where price inflation is dominated by food prices, inflation targeting using exclusively the standard instruments could be severely costly in terms of high interest rate. In Nigeria, I observed that headline inflation was dominated by food prices. Thus, if by fluke you have good rains and bumper harvest, food prices drop, and bingo, headline inflation is down, and vice versa. We also observed that given the high risks associated with agriculture, commercial bank lending to it was extremely low, despite its huge potential to contribute to economic growth and lower inflation. Agriculture, therefore, became for us a silver bullet for employment and output growth and lowering inflation. And hence, any structured intervention that boosts food supply or agriculture assists the central bank in achieving its objectives, employment, output, and lower stable inflation. It seemed then to be the silver bullet that created a win-win. So we decided to de-risk the agricultural sector to make it profitable, good enough for these guys to lend to them, and also created a special fund for large-scale commercial agriculture. My successors have expanded on the program, and I would say with certain degrees of success. And therefore, my conclusion from that is that under special circumstances, targeted structural monetary policy can work. The second footnote, which I won't elaborate, is that ownership of capital matters. Ethnicity of capital is real, and financial banking system of a country is part of its national security. We learned quite a lot during the consolidation of Nigeria's banking system. We won't say more than this in this forum. Remember the statements I made? Ownership of capital matters. Ethnicity of capital is real. And financial banking system is part of a national security. And I will share an experience I had. Just only one footnote, I won't say more. Before we did banking consolidation in Nigeria, there was all this. I was formally, before I went to the central bank, I was the chief economic advisor to President Obasanjo. From there, I went to the central bank. And there was just almost all this foreign investment promotion, programs in London and this and to go. I always complained. I didn't believe that it was a useful thing. It was just a jamboree. You go there, make all this presentation, you're asking foreigners, come and invest in Nigerian banking system, come and invest in the capital, come and this and so on and so forth. We got nothing. When we then consolidated the banks, through consolidation of the banking system, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars poured in. That's for starters. Even after the consolidation, there was a race to the top by the various banks. And they kept going to the capital market, and foreign money continued then to flow in billions. But remember, when we were going on promotion, investment promotion, nobody listened to anybody. But once the banks showed up, because before the consolidation, none of Nigeria's 89 banks was in the top 1,000 banks in the world. None. All the 89 banks put together were just the size of number 4 bank in South Africa before the consolidation. After the consolidation, and we had 25, in 3 years, 14 Nigerian banks were in the top 1,000 banks. 2 of them actually in the top 300 after first 3 years. And obviously the race to the bottom meant they were then, spiraling. ahead. Much of the new capital, the new venture, the Dangotes and so on and so forth of this world that then became huge. He himself has said it in many fora that without the banking consolidation, he will not be anywhere near as big as he is today. Because only then could you have banks. Before then, you needed to syndicate, you needed $500 million, you needed to bring all the banks together. But recently, the Nigerian banks syndicated and put together the $11 billion investment he was making in the downstream, as the case may be. So, with that transformation came something, which is what led me to the point I was making here. The world became interested in the Nigerian banks. They wanted to come. They now wanted to acquire. And one of the major banks in the world, the UK bank, I wouldn't mention the name for some reasons, they led the entire Africa leadership to see me. They were interested to put in £500 million in the banking system. For starters, they wanted to acquire one of the medium-sized banks then. They were ready £500 million. And my response was for good or for bad. My response was, thank you very much. You're welcome. I'm glad now. We used to come before to beg you to come to bring money. I'm glad now. We're not asking anybody. And you now trust me to my office. You want to come to put in money. So you are welcome. But you know what? If you can go to the Hilton Hotel, we'll give you the forms and all the necessary things to fill. Once you meet the requirements, just go to the Hilton Hotel and sit. I will bring you the banking license to your hotel. Come and establish in your own name, but I will not let you acquire this particular one that you want to take over. These ones, I wanted to grow them to become Nigeria's own champions and multinationals banking thing tomorrow. And if you walk through Heathrow, you might see some of the adverts of these Nigerian banks and so on. Before long, Nigerian banks were all over Africa. At least before I left office, from about 3 branches in Africa to about 37, and almost in most of Europe and America. Because we discovered that there is a huge difference in the risk appetite of the foreign bank versus the domestic bank. Their risk appetite is different. Citibank had them before then existed in Nigeria for decades, but they didn't have more than 6 branches in Lagos. So I said to this guy, you just come, this brand bank had more than 200 branches all around the country. You just come and say, risk this, and you'll be only lending to British businesses, as the case may be. No. Come, I'll give you a license, operate in your own name. No question. But then, that takes me at one point. Second point, when I said it's part of national security, they weren't happy about it. And of course, complaints all over. I go to Britain and I'm invited for this policy discussion. I went to the US, then Assistant Secretary of Treasury invited me for a discussion on this particular issue. Why are you not letting, people to come and take? This is a violation of WTO rules. That's what this Assistant Secretary told me. I said, thank you very much, I appreciate it. Before then, I had read about some failed acquisition programs by some people from the Middle East and Chinese and so on, that they wouldn't let, and it came up in at the Congress and so on and so forth. And then I asked him a hypothetical question. What if some Chinese want to buy off Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase tomorrow? What will be your reaction? And listen to the response. He said to me, it depends on the size, on what share that they want to buy. If it's small enough, okay. And then I had got a response to my question. I said, why not? Wouldn't it be free market, WTO? Let them buy Bank of America and let China come and buy off Bank of America and JP Morgan, Chase, and Citibank. It's the market. Sell it to them. He then smiled. He then realized where I was coming from. I was getting back as a response to the quest about WTO and what that had to be. I know the appetite. You walk into a bank and you see this guy, the local, you're an entrepreneur, and he understands what you are talking about, and you guys can talk. That's already at least 25% a leg in. We are talking about some region in Ghana. He's not as frightened as this other one is doing risk analysis. No, if you leave Accra, then you are dead, and so on and so forth. So it was that conversation at the Treasury, because when we had coffee break after, we were discussing it with some of their officials. It was one of them with whom I was pursuing this particular line of debate, who then made this statement to me that why they wouldn't let that will be because the banking financial system is part of national security. And like I said, I won't elaborate too much on this particular factor, but it is a point for us to bear in mind. 9, and then the 10th one I end. Short one, economics of peace and security. Ladies and gentlemen, economists must pay serious attention to peace and security. Africa is experiencing waves of terrorism, ethnic and religious expansionism, and these have implications for the future that we are trying to foresee and control. Of course, I've talked about the Fund for Peace Fragile States Index, and the analysts must keep keenly a tab on what is happening around us, because much of the shocks of tomorrow are going to be transnational. Economists cannot afford the luxury of conclusions or prescriptions based on ceteris paribus assumptions, all things being equal. In the real world, all things are not equal. To be real and impactful, policymakers need to know that our analysis takes account of the real world SWOTs, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And finally, institutions matter, the 10th one. Economists need to understand the meta-level governance architecture for delivering sustainable development. They matter greatly, institutions. We must understand and seek reforms of the meta-level governance architecture that can impose binding constraints on the efficiency, effectiveness of public policy. Most analysts romanticize about the developmental states of the East Asian countries, or the strides of Rwanda, Ethiopia, etc. in recent years. We want visionary leaders with long-term strategic thinking and planning. I often raise this question. In how many of these states, with short-term electoral cycle and term limits, do we have politicians actually thinking long-term and act beyond the electoral cycles? This is something to get us to think. Politicians want to maximize their stay in power and would often resort to transient populism to achieve it. So if you're looking for them to start dreaming about 21, for them it's slogan. It's concerned about the next election and to win. You will talk the slogans, but go and look at the actual thing that is doing today. The actual thing he's doing today is towards the next election, period. Leave the fancy documents. So, my point is that it should not be off limits for economists to debate the appropriate institutions of democracy given our stage of development and the race and the need and the race to catch up with the rest of the world. For example, we need to debate, and we're having this debate in Nigeria, debate single term limits for presidents, or some configurations that could enable a government to focus on its real agenda from day one and not starting the campaigns for re-election just immediately after swearing in. Because I mean, we were debating it in Nigeria. Why don't you just have a president 7-year tenure and that's it. You move on. The next person comes 7 years or 6 years or 80, whatever it is. Have him secure him and so on. So you're not worrying about next re-election. If you want to bulldoze, put 8 lane from here to there, but he can't do it. This is in the long term when Ghana, Accra will have a population of about, Accra will be home to almost 10 million people. How will people fit in here? And somebody wants to have a long-term vision, 2050, then we need to pull down about 200 houses to create 8 lanes to go there. No. However you go to him to design that, he's a politician. He has to think about the votes, the uproar, and he will be scared. He can't, because the next election is around the corner. He will pass it to the next one that will come. Let the next government deal with it. Yes, it is a good one. You want us to, and then of course the midnight advisors will come and tell whoever tell the president or who, that person who suggested it, see, I told you, he's not with us. Because in the end it becomes a loyalty game. It's a loyalty game. I told you, he just wants to sabotage us. He's working for the opposition. Don't you know, and so on. And so the man, the next time you come and you are talking to him, he will be looking at you with one eye. And then I ask again, ladies and gentlemen, what about the institutional arrangements to manage natural resources for intergenerational equity? On this one, I plead with you in the name of God. Please don't learn from Nigeria. Nigeria, we historically treated oil, every oil boom, we treated it as a permanent shock. When there is a downturn, we say it's temporary. Once it gets up, and it's for consumption. And all the revenues is for us to consume today. Nobody cares about tomorrow. Let tomorrow worry for itself. And our own institutional arrangement is even enshrined in our constitution. You get the revenues, you share, and you consume. Over time, consumption has been ratcheting up. Successive governments. Because we treat every downturn as temporary, wherever the prices slumped, we continue to borrow in order to, we are waiting for it to get back up. And over time, we build humongous, unsustainable consumption patterns, bureaucracies that in recent years, for almost 10 years now, our recurrent expenditures continuously exceed total government revenue, including oil, to a point that literally we are even part of the borrowing is to finance recurrent expenditure. Every penny spent on any capital is borrowed. And I am saying, Ghana, please, in the name of God, don't learn that lesson from us. Maybe you can begin to redesign yours. I don't know what the situation is here. And of course, the politician with 4-year electoral cycles, no one will want to fix the problem, just like I gave with the issue of demolishing houses. Nobody wants to tackle it, because who wants to be the one responsible for sacking, rationalizing institutions and sacking maybe 10,000 public servants, and as the case may be. It's a political hot potato. So what every successive government does is to kick down the can down the road. You just see the can there, an empty can on the road. You just kick it, hoping that another one comes. Nobody wants to pick it and put in the trash can. We'll keep kicking it down the road and hope that somehow you'll wake up in the morning and the can will disappear. And I'm saying to Ghana, and I hope, please don't learn that from us. These natural resources belong to current and future generations. How do we manage them such that they benefit current and future generations? Again, it goes down to understanding the institutional mechanism, the governance infrastructure that makes it impossible for the political actors to be able to act on what is expedient for the country in the long term. I don't blame them. That's why I said we should pay attention to political economy. If you don't understand what gets them to act, then you will sit down and say, if only they are good leaders, if only they have good vision, if only they have, I'm sorry, the good vision, this thing is circumscribed by the institutions around which they work. And that is a chicken and egg problem. Sometimes somebody said to me, it's good leadership. I say yes, but you also need a good system. If you don't have a good system, my perfect analogy is Messi and Ronaldo. They are fantastic footballers about system and leadership, which one is which. And they say, no, you have to tackle both. You don't wait for the good leader to emerge from the sky. It's a product of a system as well. And they operate within the rules set by the system. If you have Ronaldo and Messi, fantastic footballers, but you go and take them to play in a cassava farm, where the cassava farm becomes the football field. Okay? That's the system. Ronaldo and Messi might become the worst footballers. In fact, the people who might become the best footballers in the cassava farm might be the street urchins who are there, who know, crisscross the farm and barefoot and so on. They will be the one to jump over here. Ronaldo is looking for the thing to go and dribble. No, this is not dribbling. You have to jump over the mound of yam and so on and so forth. So sometimes the system itself creates the framework under which and can even determine the kinds of leadership that could emerge and the boundaries within which they could operate. And that's why, like I said, economists as we want to make impact, we must all be involved in thinking through this, because sometimes it becomes a chicken and egg. Come up with fantastic policies. It can't work because the system just doesn't make for, it's not built for efficiency. It's not built for effectiveness. In Nigeria's case, I said that the kind of federalism that we run is designed for consumption, and we're expecting it to become a competitive system. You cannot expect a system built for consumption to become a productive one. We're just mixing it up. So the system can become overarching binding constraint. Just 2-3 sentences to conclude. There are dozens of other common sense ideas we could share, but we must conclude, ladies and gentlemen. As I was writing, kept writing till 3 this morning, I said, no, you just have to conclude this one. It's good. I looked at the word count, it was expanding. I said, we have to conclude. One of the key messages we have emphasized here so far is that for our research economists to be impactful, they must not only be seasoned economists, but must also possess more than a casual understanding of how the polity works. Our concluding message will be to urge our academics and professionals to get actively involved or stop complaining. Yes, focus intensely on your work at the personal level. Be the change you want to see at the personal level, and let the change start with you. Fantastic. But for a country such as Ghana, Nigeria, and many other African countries, the marginal value of every highly educated or skilled person is huge. And only through multitasking can the full potentials be exploited for the society. We can't afford the luxury of contentment with just doing my work, quote and unquote. Get involved in the public conversation, and if possible, public service, because ultimately, public service is the best form of philanthropy. We don't just live, we live to matter. The man we have come to celebrate today presents us with an example to emulate. KB's life crisscrossed many areas and countries in Africa as an economist, academic, consultant, public servant, and politician. His works have touched thousands and millions of lives. He lived he mattered a hugely impactful life. As we discuss the practical economics for Ghana and Africa, and more so as the chair of economic research takes his or her chair at the Department of Economics, may we always ask, how would KB have done it differently to make a difference? If we keep that focus, then in my view, KB may have died, but his essence will then continue to live with us.